Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. We'll be starting soon. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bookish Hour. I am Sarah Burr.
And I am J.C. Kenney, and it is Baby Friday evening. And, I have my wine because I cannot wait to chat we got a triple threat super guest tonight, Sarah. And I think it's time to get bookish.
Time to get bookish, my favorite time of the week. I am so excited to be chatting with Lorie Lewis Ham this evening. Yes. Lorie, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Bookish Hour. We're so excited to have you. For our viewers who may not be familiar with you and your work, do you mind just giving yourself a brief introduction?
Sure. First off, thank you so much for having me here today. I've been writing for forever, it seems like, and I've written poems, articles, short stories through the years, written for our local newspaper off and on. And then about 13 years ago, I started an online magazine called Kings Over Life and started a mystery podcast called Mystery Rat's Maze. And in between all of that, I've also been writing mysteries. And I wrote 5 books in the early 2000s, and then Kings Over Life kind of got in the way. And now I'm back to writing mysteries again.
Well, we are very joyful that you are back to writing mysteries.
Yes.
Although I can definitely understand why your magazine project has you do so much for the author community. It's quite amazing.
Yes. Thank you.
And yes,
You're
and we thank you very much for that. But we're here to celebrate your writing tonight, and we're really excited to be talking about your mystery, One of Us. Could you kind of paint a picture for our viewers about the main character, Roxy, and how she finds herself in the middle of a mystery?
Well, it starts off, Roxy Carlucci was a children's book author, and she lost her book contract, and she was just kind of like, okay, now what do I do? And she lived on the coast of California, beautiful beach town, living the dream. And when this happens, she doesn't know where she's going to go or what she's going to do. She happens to have a cousin named Steven, who is a PI, and he lives in Fresno, California. And he says, hey, come stay with me until you figure your life out. And that's how she ends up in Fresno, much to her dismay. She's very thankful, though, that he happens to live in the Tower District, which is actually the arts and entertainment district of the area. And so that's how she gets there. She ends up volunteering with a community theater production that's also an animal rescue fundraiser while she's trying to figure out what to do. And someone's murdered. And Steven is hired to find the killer, and she helps him out.
Well, that is so great. It's a fabulous introduction. I've really enjoyed it. I always have to qualify. I haven't finished the book, but I'm really enjoying reading it right now.
Well, thank you.
And you bet. Thank you for writing it. I guess kind of my first question is your description of Fresno. Now, I've been to California, but I've only been to, I've been to LA, I've been to San Diego, and I've been to San Francisco. So is the tower in the Tower District, is that a real thing? And could you talk about that a little bit?
It is. Now, there are fictional elements that I put into the stories for the story's sake. There are some restaurants that aren't real. The bookstore, unfortunately, isn't real. But a lot of what I talk about is definitely real. It's actually my favorite part of the area. It's a very historical kind of area. You kind of feel like you've gone back in time. It's where most of the theater in the area takes place. And there's a lot of restaurants and art galleries, and even a couple of, what would you call them? Well, they're in the book, where people go and take lessons, music lessons, dance lessons, and voice lessons. And it's just a really fun area, and it's unlike anything else in Fresno.
It sounded like it had just so much character
Yes.
and was really a character of its own in the book. And I've actually, in my former life, when I was working in healthcare IT, I visited Fresno, and I am very sorry that I did not get to see this part of it, because it really was, even though it's a big city, there was so much charm. And seeing it through Roxy's eyes, because she's not exactly thrilled to be moving to Fresno.
Yes.
And the way that she kind of encounters things, where it's always these moments of, oh, well, maybe this won't be so bad. And that budding optimism that she experiences, I thought was just incredibly charming. As a main character, I would love to know how Roxy introduced herself to you when you first began crafting this idea for One of Us.
Well, she's had a little bit of a journey. The series that I wrote earlier on featured a gospel singing amateur sleuth. I used to sing gospel music, so it was a world that I knew. And in the last book of that series, she actually gets introduced because that character, Alex, goes out on the road singing and ends up in Roxy's town, in Roxy's area, which is actually the Santa Cruz area, for if anyone who knows where that is. And my plan at the time was to start a series with her, featuring her as someone who did animal rescue. And so that's how she came into it. And that's how I got to know her, and she came into the story. And Stephen actually was in all of those other books. So he just kind of follows me everywhere. And, but when I sat down to write that book, I mean, at that time, there weren't any animal rescue mysteries. But it took me so long to get going with the story about her, that by the time, I was really getting into starting it, there were a lot. And so I thought, I really would like to have that element in there to a certain degree, but I would like to do something different. And that's when I thought about moving her to the Tower District. So that's where she came from.
I love origin stories like that, and I especially love to know that Stephen. I mean, he's one of my favorite characters, just because he seems to be this. I almost think of him as like a fairy godmother. He's there. He is, and for folks who are joining us, Stephen is Roxy's cousin, and their relationship is just so sweet. And the fact that they both come from a mob family is just like it was. There's so many fun elements of this. And one thing that I have to call out is right at the very beginning, when Roxy is talking about her idol, Blair Waldorf. Anybody who knows me knows that I absolutely love a good Gossip Girl reference. And I just thought that was such a fun way to start off the introduction to your character. And I think that the audience is in for a real treat. And speaking of our audience, we have our viewers who are joining us this evening. We're delighted that you are here. We've got Farmhouse Reader, DHB, Mark Baker, Regina Williams, who has put in a comment that she loves your podcast, Lorie, and
yay.
She's discovered some great cozy mystery authors because of it.
Yes.
So
Awesome.
that's very exciting. Thank you, Regina, for sharing that. And Chelsea Walters also says hello.
Yeah,
Hi.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us live this evening. We're talking with Lorie Lewis Ham about her mystery, One of Us, which is book 1 in the Tower District Mysteries.
Yes.
Can you, before we kind of get into more of the world that you've created and the really fun cast of supporting characters, can you tease anything about where Roxy is going in the series, and when we can possibly look forward to having book 2 join?
Well, the hope is that book 2, which is called One of You, will be out in October. I hope for sure this year. And it obviously takes place in the Tower, and it is actually going to have to do with, it's kind of a little mini mystery festival, and local mystery authors are coming together for that.
Very
And
cool.
of course, somebody dies, And it's set at Halloween, which is my favorite time of year. So.
Oh, I love a mystery set at Halloween. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's really
So Lorie,
exciting. I'm glad that we get to see more.
yeah, and I'm sorry for talking
Definitely.
over you, Sarah. I'm just super excited because I got to say, Lorie, kind of going back to Roxy. Um, Now, Roxy is young enough to be my daughter because I'm 57, but I have to say, as I'm reading, about her, she's a King Arthur fan. She's got this amazing sword named Excalibur. She's a Star Trek fan. So I have Mr. Spock come and join us tonight. I'm like, okay,
Nice.
she's way too young for me, but she is totally my dream girl. So I just had to say that.
Awesome.
Well, I love, and there's another moment when you're so wonderful, Lorie, at introducing your characters and really like
Oh, thank you.
capturing the essence of who they are in a very, very short amount of time. And one of the lines that really caught my attention was when, so at the very, and this isn't too spoilery for our audience members, but at the very beginning, Roxy's making her trek to from her previous home to her new home in Fresno, and she's putting her Excalibur sword in the trunk of the car. She's putting a Scooby-Doo messenger bag in the car, and she's just looking at it, and she says, "So much could be said about me by looking at what I had just brought out into the car." And just like seeing like all of her hobbies and likes and interests kind of gathered together, I thought it was a really clever way to introduce somebody, because you're giving us so much information, but it's done in a way that it's an action scene of like, I'm moving my entire life, and this is what my entire life is. So I thought that was a really clever way to introduce Roxy, and I'm wondering, was that done intentionally, or was it something like you just wanted to have us see her in this moment of transition?
For the second part, I'm very much a pantser. So I just sit down and I write, and that just kind of happened. I knew that she had those things that she cared about, and she's moving, packing up her life, and those are things that I wanted to share about her.
I admire folks that can be pantsers, because I definitely need to have a plan of where I'm going. Otherwise, I cannot really get myself to move beyond the page. So I find that to be always an admirable trait in a writer, because I cannot do it to save my life.
Yeah.
The only way I can do it. If I outline, I'm done.
Now, I'd love to know why. Like, what about outlining? Is it feeling like, okay, like now that I have this like skeleton in place, that you feel that you have to stick to it? Or I'm always so curious to know the writing process itself, and why people are drawn one way or another.
That's hard to answer. I think because for me, I enjoy the story just kind of happening as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I do a lot of editing afterwards, but it just is the only thing that works for me, is to just sit down and go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll make notes. I use a calendar, and I'll write down, she did this here as I go
Oh,
along,
nice.
so I can track things. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. If I outline, I think everything, I enjoy discovering the story as I write it. And I feel like if I outlined, it wouldn't. I mean, I usually know who's going to die, but I don't necessarily know the killer when I start.
Ooh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and just for everybody out there, I think this is just a perfect example of the old saying that write in a way that works for you. Because
Yeah.
Sarah and I have often talked, we're both outliners, but Lorie, I totally get what you're saying about I'm just going to write because it's so much fun to discover things along the way. And because at the end of the day, this all needs to be fun. And so that kind of leads me into my next question is, we early on, we obviously, we meet Roxy, we meet Stephen, but then we meet a couple of very interesting characters when Roxy gets roped into helping out at the local community theater. Could you talk a little bit about our local playwright and director, because there's some interesting things going on with those two characters?
Well, the playwright Clark, he is this is one way that I brought mental health into it. He is bipolar.
Okay.
And so that comes into play a little bit. I mean, it's well under control and all that, but he is a little more, brooding type. I can't remember if she says it in this book, but I know she definitely brings it up at some point about how he may be Clark like Superman, but he's more brooding like Bruce.
Yes.
Batman,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yep.
And so he's very creative, as he is a playwright. And then the director is very what you'd expect a director to be, a little very much wanting the control, very much a control freak, and wanting things his way, and a little kind of bossy, and the two of them clash because he wants to change things and Clark's like, no, this is my play, these are my words, you're not changing them. So they kind of butt heads a bit, and Stephen has to work as kind of a mediator between the two of them to make things work out.
Your point, Lorie, regarding you had mentioned, working in and talking about mental health. Both JC and I are big advocates for mental health, especially in our genre of cozy mysteries, because a lot of times, people don't really explore how our main characters or characters in general can be affected by the trauma and the events that are happening around them. So I am curious because there are other characters who who have their own backstory within One of Us, and I'm curious, was that something that you set out to do when you were writing this, or did it really come to you naturally as you were exploring the characters in the world that you were creating?
As in all of their backstories, or specifically Clark's?
Well, just maybe because we have Josh, Roxy's brother, and just how I'm curious how you wove it in, and that decision to do so, because it's something that not a lot of people tend to do, but I think is important. And was that important to you as the author?
It was. I had an experience near the beginning when I very first started writing about Roxy, with my best friend was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and just the things that he went through, the things that our friendship went through, and just the different things, I became very interested in learning more, and and being more aware, and I really wanted that to be a part of her story. And that actually came up in the book that she guests in of the other series. The whole thing with her brother and everything, that is what connected her to another character that was in that series. And so that whole thing was set up way back then. And yeah, it was intentional, and it was very important to me.
I'm
Right.
glad that you got to explore that, because I think, and JC, I'm sure, we're both very much believe that that it should be discussed, and to help kind of remove the stigma that is out there.
Definitely.
Yeah, I thank you for that, because as anybody who has followed my writing career knows, I'm very open about my challenges, living with depression, and then my older kid and their suicide attempts. So the fact that that those types of topics aren't easy to write about a lot of times. So yeah, I thank you also for including that. And so enough of the heavy stuff. Kind of like to take a little turn here to talk about another character who I want to know a lot about. I have never come across this type of character in a book. Tell us about Merlin.
Merlin is a pet rat. He's actually a Dumbo rat. And for anybody who doesn't know what that means, is his ears are set off to the side more and more round, like an elephant's ears, hence Dumbo. I used to do pet rat rescue. And I did that for quite a number of years. And so that's where I got connected to that animal. And they're so amazing. And they're so misunderstood. It's another thing that I wanted to share what they were really like. what pet rats are really like, because they're not anything like, the ones that run around in the sewer and all of that you see. They're sweet and smart. They're kind of like a mix of a cat and a dog in a little miniature body. And so it was important to me to have Merlin in the story.
I love the scene where Roxy puts him on her shoulder and goes to the door to greet Lucas, who is another character that I just absolutely fell in love with. And that he, when he's greeting her, he's like purposely like going around to like, he's aware of Merlin being there within that hug. And I just thought, it's like, oh, this is a really beautiful moment. So I'd love to chat a little bit more about Lucas and his role. Roxy is surrounded by a lot of really great male figures, just in what it means to be a good, kind person. So I'd love to know a little bit more about Lucas, how he introduced himself into the story, as well as, and maybe just kind of a little bit of background for our viewers who might not be familiar with him yet.
Well, he too was introduced in the other series because the whole situation with the brother, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say, because it happens before, is that her brother had committed suicide. And she, through dealing with that whole situation, she became even closer to Lucas than she already was. They kind of comforted each other and saw each other through that situation, because Lucas was her brother's partner. And he's her best friend, and he's just been there for a long time, and they've gone through a lot together. He's a reporter, and he kind of, she teases him, calls him kind of like a surfer dude. Now, he's not the blonde version of, he's Asian, but just kind of that frame of mind. Like, he comes there and she's like, you realize there's no ocean here, right? What are you doing here? So he just came in that same situation. He came out of the story that I wanted for her. And he's one of my favorites too.
Well, I got such a kick out of him, because, to Sarah's point, the way I think it's when, okay, I get this way, Lorie. I apologize. I get excited and then I can't talk, So Sarah knows
me all the time.
Yeah, give JC a second here. But one of the things I think is really cool is, to Sarah's point, that Roxy's our main character. But yes, she does have the supporting cast of, a bunch of dudes, and they're nice guys, and that is not only, I think, refreshing, but I think, for men or young men to see that's some real serious positive role model stuff that you give to us, because, the opportunity to see men just being nice, not trying to hit on her or take advantage of her or having ulterior motives. I think that's a really valuable thing. So I tip my hat to you with that.
Well, thank you.
Now, to talk just a little bit more about your writing process, Lorie. You stated that you've been writing forever. What drew you to the mystery genre itself, and how did you know the moment that you had a story in you that you're like, I can sit down and I can write this until I get to the end?
Well, my brother is actually responsible for introducing me to mystery. I grew up reading every horse book that the library owned. That's what was my reading. And when I was a teenager, he introduced me to Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, and I'm still huge fans of both. And I've always known that I wanted to write. I mean, that was never a question. And early on in my teen years, I tried to write a Star Trek book, because they were accepting them, without agents and stuff like that. Yes. and that just didn't happen. And then I tried to write a book featuring Stephen. Didn't work. And so when I was in my early 20s, a local chapter of Sisters in Crime was started, and I thought, oh, cool, I want to be a part of this. And I was talking to the other members, and they kept telling me, you really should write a mystery about a gospel singer. I'm like, really? Would anybody read that? I mean, to me it was boring because that had been my life. And so I finally gave in and sat down and started to write that. And that was the first time I was able to get all the way to the end of a book. And she kind of played herself out there in my life. And I knew I wanted to write a mystery again. And it actually took me 11 years to finish One of Us because of that journey of discovering what her story was. And because I was, doing the magazine at the same time, working at the same time, raising kids at the same time. And so I didn't actually get it finished until early in the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's the journey for me with mysteries. But once I started writing mysteries, I couldn't imagine writing anything else.
I hear you. My writing, the first book that I ever sat down and wrote from, chapter 1 to writing the end was a like young adult fantasy, like Dan Brown meets Twilight kind of thing. And it's something that at the time I was really, really proud of it because I wrote it when I was in college. And now I'm like, I don't know if I ever want to see that again. Of course, I have people that are like, "Are you ever going to go back to that? Are you ever going to go back to that?" It's like I love the world of mystery, and I'm not 100% sure exactly what it is about it that draws me in so much. I think it's the kind of everyday person, and kind of to JC's point about having nice role models. It's really like in the mystery genre with amateur sleuths, it's so nice to have good people, on display that are, trying to right the wrongs of the world and not really expecting anything from it. They just want to see justice served. And I think that for me is what resonates so much. I'm curious. And JC, I also want to hear about what your first writing project was as well, because I don't think I know that. But Lorie, I'm wondering what is there something in particular about the mystery genre that is this is why I write and why I don't want to write anything else?
I think a lot of what you said there about the fact that there's justice. I mean, there's so much going on in the real world. It's nice to have a situation where the good guys are going to win, and the right things are going to happen. And I think that's a lot of it. That and just, enjoying a puzzle, enjoying figuring out who did it and then how to plant the seeds of that along the way.
Mhm.
I think those are probably the two main things for me. When I was first starting to write after Sisters, I went to it was a writing class, and the teacher there kept trying to get me to write romances. She wanted me to specifically write Christian romances, and I'm like, no. And anytime I would try, somebody's going to die. So, it's going to be a mystery anyway. That's just what I wanted, what speaks to me and what I enjoy.
And I think that is, again, you bring back to kind of what we talked about earlier, what speaks to you, what you enjoy. This is a tough gig, and it's not worth it if it's not any fun. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And so I do want to tell folks that we are about halfway through the show. So, this has been fabulous for folks. If you have any questions for Lorie, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we will relay them because unfortunately our time is running short. But Sarah, I think it is about time for maybe to tell us a little bit more about how generous Lorie is being tonight.
Yes, so we have a wonderful ebook giveaway for you guys this evening. Lorie is gifting a copy of One of Us to one of our lucky viewers. Lorie, do you have a magic word that the folks who are joining us live can type into the chat to enter into the drawing?
I do. Merlin.
Perfect. And so, folks, make sure that you're logged into your Google or YouTube account. drop the name Merlin into the chat, and we will draw our winner at the end of our Bookish Hour. JC, really quickly, what was the first writing project that you sat down, not necessarily even completed, but was like the first time you're like, oh, I can do this?
Well, okay, so the first time was August 2011. And I won't go into too many details because this is about Lorie's show, but I had this idea for a long cross-country trip, guy meets girl. They go on this trip across the country from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I just kind of had this idea and wanted to see where it went, and it actually turned into a romance. So that I actually finished it in 6 weeks, and
wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, the first draft. But yeah, so that was my first book that I actually wrote, and I was fortunate enough that got published in 2013. My favorite little story about writing that book is that my older kiddo, Shay, who was, let's see, about 16 at the time, offered to read and edit it for me. And
wow.
yes. And so they did until they gave it back to me and said, Dad, I can't read it anymore now that you're getting to the gushy parts. So it's like, okay, fair enough.
I can imagine. But how nice to have that support. And I think that like we have to thank all of our family members who have read our work, provided feedback, even if it's not their scene. It's like, good job. Like but it's also nice to have, the feedback and to begin building the community of writers around you as you kind of dive in. And Lorie, you had mentioned Sisters in Crime. And of course, you've created this amazing community through your Kings River Life magazine. And before we switch topics to talking about your podcast, because we definitely want to hear a podcaster's perspective, because I don't think, JC, we haven't had anybody on the show that like does podcasting.
No.
Wow. So it's a first.
Lorie, you're the first.
So before we do change the topic, I have to know, is Orange Up a real drink, or was that something that you concocted for this
Something
for this
I made
book?
up. Actually, I made it up for Stephen a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody out there has actually read my other series, it's the Alexandra Walters series, and Stephen is her boyfriend. And if you really watch, you'll notice that Alex gets mentioned every once in a while because she didn't pick him. Anyway, and that came up with that early on in that series. So yeah.
Is it something that you've tried? Because I was like, would orange juice and 7-Up like taste good, or is it like?
Try that specifically, but when I was a kid, I remember anytime we'd have like a birthday party or something, my mom would make like Kool-Aid and then add some 7-Up to it, and it gave it kind of like a little kick. And that's
Nice
kind of
fizz.
where the idea came from. Yeah.
Nice. I thought, I was like, oh, that's a fun drink.
Yeah. So Lorie, I also have one more quick question before we shift gears over to talk about your podcast. And that is the fact that we have, and Sarah touched on it real briefly, we have some organized crime background in our characters.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that's an interesting juxtaposition that Roxy is a children's book author. And so it's easy to think, okay, there's kind of like that warm hug feeling, someone writing books for kids, but also has organized crime in her background. So it's like, okay, that's a little different. Can you tell us, how that came about?
Well, that has a long history as well. When my brother and I, when I was a teenager, the two of us started writing mystery parties for our friends. And we were both kind of fascinated with the whole, mafia thing. And so we set one of our parties in it was a birthday party for Mafia Don's daughter. And so we had all these mafia characters, and believe it or not, that's actually where Stephen Carlucci first showed up.
Wow.
And so that started that. And then when I started expanding on him and thinking, the series was going to be about him, I started studying up on the mafia. I mean, it just kind of, it felt like an interesting little twist to things. Like for him, he didn't know until his brother was killed
Mm-hmm.
about the family connection. And then he spent his life trying to be as opposite from that as he possibly could, because it was responsible for his brother's death and he blamed his dad and all this stuff. And then Roxy is hers as his cousin. Her parents were part of the family, but they ran a winery. And so it wasn't as involved and as into it. So while she grew up around it and was aware of it, it didn't, she wasn't a part of it. And she had a good childhood until her parents died. And so she's got that to draw on and was very close to her parents. So that's kind of how it how it happened. It just feels like a nice contrast to me. I it's interesting to me. And Stephen's dad gets drawn into the new book a bit as well. So the mafia twist is still in there in the second book.
Nice.
I am fascinated by these birthday parties and thinking that my friends growing up, I did not have like the right crew if we were not having mystery birthday parties. That sounds amazing.
Oh, it was
And
fun.
it
was great.
I feel like that might be a Jeopardy question someday about your books. Like, Stephen Carlucci made his first appearance in, and that's
nice.
amazing.
We actually, first birthday, we did one of those boxed ones. And to us, well, this is boring. So we said, well, why don't we just write our own?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's so cool.
That takes so much planning. We did.
Oh, it does.
There's a game service that's called Hunt a Killer, and they send you, I think it's every like 2 weeks, a box of clues, and you have to kind of like puzzle together. The first one that we did was like a high school reunion where somebody ends up dead, and you have all of the people who've attended the high school reunion, and every week you're kind of whittling down your suspect list.
Interesting.
It's really fun. And that's the kind of stuff that I like to do. And I love that, like, that's the norm in the mystery community. And so kind of switching gears to talk a little bit more about the broader mystery community. Lorie, would you mind sharing a little bit about your fabulous podcast, how it came about, and where our viewers can find it? Because they're going to want to check it out immediately after this episode.
Yes, totally.
Oh, thank you. Glad to hear that. Well, for the longest time, I'll go all the way back to the beginning again. When I was younger, I wanted to write for television. That's what I really wanted to do. But, life happens. So then once I started the magazine, and I also was getting involved on YouTube a bit, and there were all these web series, and I thought, oh, I want to write a web series. And so I started looking at, no, that's too much. So I started thinking about how I used to listen to old time radio shows, mystery detective shows. And I thought, wonder if I could do a podcast that would be kind of like that. And we don't act out everything with a bunch of different actors and there's not sound effects. But what we ended up with is, because I also have a connection to local theater, was local actors reading mystery short stories or first chapters of books. And they don't just read it, they act it out. It's kind of a little bit like some audiobooks are. They do the different voices and they become the characters. And that's kind of where it all started. And it actually was just going to be short stories to begin with. And then authors started asking me, well, I don't have a short story, but could you do a chapter? It's like, yeah, we could do that. So, it just started building from there. And it's a lot more work than I realized it would be, but I think we can say that about a lot of things. And so it's been fun though. And we've had so many different writers while it's pretty much all PG-13 at the most, we try to keep it that way. Not all the stories are cozies. We had one short story that was a serial killer. We did a Lizzie Borden one at Halloween. We did a story by Lori Raider Day that was a little darker. And so it's not all cozies. You can be a cozy fan can feel pretty safe, that we try not to have any, language or anything graphic in there, but it is quite a variety, and it's been a lot of fun.
So, can you give us the name of the podcast,
Yes.
and also
Yes.
where can folks find it?
It's Mystery Rats Maze Podcast.
Okay.
And it's on Podbean, but it's also pretty much anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. If you just search for the name, be sure and put the apostrophe S, not just Mystery Rats, but Mystery Rats Maze Podcast. And you can find it on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on Amazon Podcasts, pretty much everywhere.
The idea is just so fun, and I can very much sympathize with how much work it probably is.
Yeah.
And for our viewers who are authors and writers themselves, is there a way that folks can submit their work to be featured, or is it something where it's grown so much that you get to select what you're doing and kind of have the pick of whatever you'd like?
Well, people can submit. They can just send to krlmagazine@gmail.com. It has to be 3,000 words or less. And it's not a guarantee. You just send it in and we'll see if it is a good fit. But be aware that we are planning 2024 right now. So, and we try to do a balance of short stories and first chapters.
That's so cool. And I just want to say that friend of the show, frequent contributor Grace Topping just commented, your podcast is terrific, and thank you for featuring so many terrific authors.
You're very welcome, and thanks for the compliment.
So I guess kind of not to get too technical, because it sounds a lot more work. I mean, what Sarah and I are doing here, as I always tell everybody, Sarah does 99% of it. I do like 0.5% at most. So it's easy for me. But what you are doing sounds like even way more clearly complicated, because you've got so many of these voice actors and things like that.
Yep.
Can you kind of give us an overview of how this works? Let's say, okay, I've submitted a first chapter, I've submitted a short story, and you said, yeah, this one will work. What happens next, and how does it go from there to appearing on Podbean?
Well, we have auditions, and actors send in, just a little snippet of each one of the stories, and I listen. I try to find the voice that seems to be the best fit, and then we cast them and kind of let them know what they're getting in for, because it is a process. Then they start sending me practices. It's like little rehearsals, but they can do it in their time frame. I listen, I send back notes, and they do it again, and we just keep going back and forth until we get to the point that feel that it's ready for the final recording. Before the pandemic, we had somewhere that we would get together and record it. But to keep it going during the pandemic, everybody started doing their own recordings. And so, we found out there's, free programs that people can get. Since it's all local actors, if they didn't have a microphone that was good enough, we actually have a microphone floating around Fresno, going from actor to actor. And then some of them have ended up doing so many that they've even bought their own stuff. They just enjoy it so much that they've really gotten into it and bought their own microphone and have gotten really good at it. I mean, in the beginning, it was new for everybody, because these are local stage actors, and very few of them had done any voice work. But some of them, it's just amazing to see. Some of our regulars that we have, like Sean Hopper, he can sit down and it doesn't even take very many practices before we're there. And then, of course, it has to be edited. And I am very blessed to be married to somebody who is an editor by profession. He's worked in radio for a number of years, and now he works for a company who edits programs for the radio. And so, he takes that side of it. Thank goodness. It would be forever if I tried to figure that out. So he does that. And the song, our intro song, actually was from one of the songs I used to sing. A friend of mine wrote the music, and I asked him, this kind of has a little bit of a jazzy feel. Kind of seems like it fit. Could we use it? And he said yes. So there you go. And then, of course, all the business side of it, of uploading it and sharing it and all that stuff, which is similar to what you do on YouTube.
That's amazing to hear the process, and not only that, like that you went the extra mile to keep that to keep it going during the pandemic, because I'm sure listening to these, whether it be a short story or a chapter one, really resonated with folks during a time where a lot was very uncertain. So kudos to being able to rally your team and to keep that going. And what such a fun project.
Oh, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Like I said, a lot more work than I expected. At first, when I was thinking, oh, I have to be a director. I don't know how to be a director, but now it's just, I've been doing it for several years, so I'm used to it.
I will definitely agree that there's a learning curve and trying to figure out, and for us here at the Bookish Hour, it's been, we've been truly blessed to have, just such wonderful support from authors and viewers alike, wanting to be a part of this experience. It's getting hard to tell people, though. It's like, guys, we're booking into 2025 now, and
oh wow,
it's tricky, but
yeah.
Goodness, it's so much fun. Just as this entire conversation has been so much fun, and I'm really sad that it's drawing to a close. But I do want to do a quick time check for our audience members who are joining us live. Folks, if you haven't entered in for a chance to win an ebook copy of One of Us that Lorie is gifting this evening, please make sure that you type the word Merlin into the YouTube chat. We'll be drawing our winner's name shortly. Lorie, where can folks find you beyond Kings River Life? Where, like, are what's website, any social media that they can connect you with? Where should we direct them?
Well, for my writing, it's mysteryrat.com. Do you see a theme there somewhere? And my Twitter, I'm also Mystery Rat. And then with Facebook and Instagram, I kind of do a combo thing. I share my writing stuff with the magazine stuff. Mm-hmm. So on Instagram, it's KRL Magazine. And on Facebook, we have just the regular Facebook page for the magazine, which is just Kings River Life Magazine. And then we have a mystery Facebook group, which is Mystery Rats Maze. So I think that's everything.
Perfect.
I'm on TikTok, but
you.
I'm not using TikTok yet.
I tried and failed at TikTok, so it didn't take me too long to find out this boring 57-year-old, dude wasn't made for TikTok. But again, I want to say thank you for all of your support that you give to the Cozy mystery community, because just so many of us, especially there. Not to make this about me, but I'm going to make it about me for a minute. When I had one of my books reviewed by your magazine, it was just like, oh my God, I felt like it was like I've made the big time. So that it was just so cool and so exciting. So I can't thank you enough
You're
for
very
that.
welcome.
So again,
we have one of Sarah's coming up.
I know.
Nice.
I'm so excited. I can't wait.
Yeah. So again, can you tell us what's coming next for you, Lorie?
Well, I am in what I hope are the final edits for the next book, which is One of You. And at the same time, we just released another podcast episode this week. Kings River Life goes up every Saturday. So all those things at once. And I'm really, really hoping to start book 3 during NaNoWriMo in November. That's how I started One of You. It was such a huge help to just get me going on that. I already know where that one's set. So I've got that much anyway.
Okay.
So that's where I'm at.
Very cool.
For our folks who may not be familiar with NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, total game changer.
Yep.
I don't know, Lorie, do you work with a group during that time? I know Sisters in Crime has like a big community that they rally everybody together with the challenge to write a novel in a month. And it might sound like an insurmountable task, but goodness, that's how I wrote, I think, book 2 in one of my series. It was like, wow, I couldn't believe when you have like that sense of community, but there's also like this friendly competition that you're in with yourself to cross the finish line. It's a huge help.
Yeah, definitely. I do the Sisters in Crime write-ins, which actually I'm very thankful that they've continued those twice a week since NaNoWriMo, because they're a huge help, just making me, okay, magazine and podcast aside for a little bit. This is my time to sit down and write. And that's been a huge help are the write-ins. I don't necessarily try to write a whole book, but I try to write as much as I can. And it definitely helps me get it going and get it moving. It's been a huge help.
I tell you what,
platform.
Lorie, yeah, with everything you've got going on, just listening to thinking about your schedule makes me want to go take a nap, because I tip my hat to you once again. But unfortunately, I have to be the bad guy and let everybody know we're kind of running short on time, and so this is kind of to kind of wrap things up. This is kind of when we talk a little bit about what are you watching, what are you reading, what are you listening to, some recommendations for folks. So how about you first, Sarah? What are you consuming media-wise these days?
Media-wise, so I will say that I think during our last episode, I was listening to the audiobook of The President's Daughter, and I'm still listening to it because I today just wrote the end in my current manuscript. So I'm like been very hunkered down in focusing on that. I've been reading lots of manga that really kind of helps me unwind.
Yay!
Absolutely love it. I'm working my way through this series that's called LDK. I've talked about it before on the show. I have no idea what it means, what it's the abbreviations for, but it's really nice to see how it's developing. But for a new show that I am watching I think it's on Amazon Prime. Oh my gosh, it is so funny. It's called Jury Duty. It's been something that's been recommended to us for several months now, and we finally just started watching it. I cry laughter while it's so funny. It's so well done. The premise is it is a documentary on the American judicial system. However, it's all fake. The courtroom is fake. The trial is fake. Everybody is an actor except for one person, and he thinks everything is real. And he's just like a part of like a documentary about the American court system. And it is so funny. I think we're going to finish it tonight, and I can't wait.
Nice. Well, very cool. So what's that called again, Sarah?
Jury Duty, and it's on Amazon Prime. And it's you can watch it on Freevee if you're not a Prime member.
Okay, very cool. Well, Lorie, how about you? What media are you consuming that you'd like to share or recommend?
Well, I'm about halfway through Will Trent. I'm watching it kind of after it's already aired on Hulu, and I'm really enjoying that. And I'm rewatching a favorite, Vera, on which one is that? BritBox.
Yeah.
I'm watching with my husband. I'd already watched the whole thing. It's absolutely one of my favorites, and I got him hooked on it. So we're going through that. No audiobooks at the moment.
Okay. So for me, I thought this was kind of timely because, as Sarah knows, Lorie, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. So I've actually been rewatching Star Trek Voyager. That was the Star Trek series that my wife and I first started watching when it first came out, and then we moved to Northern Indiana at the time, and we couldn't find it for a number of years because this is back in the 90s when TV was a lot harder to find, here as being an old guy again. So I'm rewatching that. And so that's been a lot of fun. And I want to mention a podcast that I haven't mentioned for a while. It's called The Well. And this is a podcast hosted by Anson Mount, who folks may know from either Star Trek Strange New Worlds or Hell on Wheels. And his friend Brandon Edgens, who is a makeup artist. And what it is, it's a podcast that talks about creativity. And the idea being is what replenishes your well in the creative world. And they've had folks from musicians to writers to scientists, all kinds of folks. And it's one of those kind of podcasts that's very accessible because Anson and Brandon they're very fun to listen to. But at the same time, it's always one of those that I walk away from listening to it thinking, I feel like I learned something, and that's always kind of one of those added bonuses because, it's you have a good time, you listen or you check something out. And then, I feel, I learned something a little smarter. So, check out The
Nice.
Well. It's kind of like, Lorie had said with her podcast, you can find it I listen to it on Podbean, but it's on a bunch of others. And so that's my recommendation. So there you have it.
That sounds like
Nice.
a really great podcast. And it kind of jogged I told you, Lorie, that I was going to forget one of the things that I wanted to talk about. But I have a true crime podcast recommendation for folks. Shocker. This week I picked up, it's called Park Predators. And it is it's so interesting in yes, you're exploring a crime, but the host really focuses on the national park that it takes place in. And so you're learning a lot about the conservation efforts that are going on in certain areas of the world or in certain states in the United States. And so JC, to your point about learning something, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm learning so much about the efforts to save, the whiteback gorilla and all of these like rare species of trees that are in Florida that are being conserved in these huge sweeping parks. And thinking about the big ones like Yosemite and such, there are a lot of big parks that I've never heard of, and just like thousands and thousands of acres, and of course murder happens there. Of course. But definitely if you're into environmental conservation or just like learning about the places to visit, but also some bad things that have happened there, definitely recommend Park Predators. It's been very, very enjoyable.
Yeah. And Lorie, I want to mention real quick, the DHB gives Will Trent 3 thumbs up.
Ooh, 3 thumbs.
So,
Yeah.
Well, folks, unfortunately, we're almost out of time here. Just a couple minutes before the hour. So, Lorie, I just kind of want to give you the last word of sorts. Is there anything else you want to share? Kind of fill us in on, before we have to say goodbye.
Wow, I think we've really covered a lot. I hope everyone checks out One of Us. I hope everyone checks out Kings Over Life and Mystery Rats Maze podcast. And we give away a lot of books on Kings Over Life. So there's that too. So hope you check it all out and have fun.
You've provided us, Lorie, with so much great content to go explore now, which I think is like always like one of the most exciting things and such a gift that we can get, especially, mystery themed, because it's always so fun. But so what I will do now is draw the name of our winner for the One of Us ebook giveaway. Our winner this evening.
My fake drum roll.
Fake drum roll. We're going to have to get a real drum roll at some point, I think.
I know somebody.
Yes. Our winner this evening is Regina Williams. Congratulations, Regina.
Congrats,
Regina.
Very excited for you. You're going to love this book.
Yes.
Go ahead and email me giveaways@thebookishhour.com. I will take your email address and send that on to Lorie. She will then forward you a book. It was Book Funnel, correct, Lorie?
Yes, Book Funnel.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Bookish Hour. It has been an absolute delight spending time with you. Thank you for sharing time with us this evening. A special thank you to Lorie for being here. It was wonderful chatting with you and learning all about your writing journey, your characters, all of the projects that you have going on. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And we hope to have you back when we can find out more about Roxy and what's next for her in One of You. And for our viewers, we hope that you will join us for a bookish moment. Our next episode is going to be on Tuesday, June 13th. It's going to be at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be joined by Jennifer J. Chow. We're talking about Hot Pot Murder. It's going to be super fun. We're very excited. And of course, to spend any bookish time with you all. So once more, thank you so much for being here. Lorie, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Until then, everybody, stay bookish. Have a good night.
Thanks, folks.